Welcome to the Pharmacist's Voice podcast, where we talk about pharmacy topics and careers so you feel connected to the profession of pharmacy and inspired to contribute to it. I'm your host, Kim Newlove, and this is episode 286. Today's episode is a podcasting pep talk with my podcasting coach, Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting. To find the show notes for this episode, go to thepharmacistvoice.com. Click on the podcast tab and find episode 286. Before I roll the interview, I want to set the stage. Many pharmacist entrepreneurs are thought leaders. They are experts in a very specific area. 4 examples that come to mind are Dr. Tim Ulbrich at Your Financial Pharmacist, Dr. Christina Madison, the public health pharmacist, Alex Barker at the Happy PharmD, and Dr. Melody Hartzler at Farm to Table. Tim's area of expertise is financial planning. YFP helps pharmacists achieve financial freedom. Dr. Christina Madison, the public health pharmacist, is a speaker, educator, and author who spreads knowledge about public health to create better communities. Dr. Alex Barker is a career coach who helps pharmacists transition into new careers. And Dr. Melody Hartzler offers her patients personalized healthcare using functional medicine. All 4 of these pharmacist entrepreneurs also use podcasting to position themselves as experts. By the way, I did not help any of them start their podcasts. I invited my podcasting coach, Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting, to talk to you today so that if you like the idea of becoming a thought leader like Tim, Christina, Alex, or Melody, you feel inspired to get started today as you listen. During our interview, Dave will share some of his success stories, benefits of having a podcast, podcasting tips and tricks, advice about MP3 production, mindset advice, monetization advice, advertising advice, and more. If you are interested in podcasting, you need to listen to this episode. Now it's disclosure time. This episode is not sponsored. However, I am an affiliate of Dave Jackson's School of Podcasting. My affiliate link is in the show notes. Kindly use that link if you sign up for the School of Podcasting. I became an affiliate because I learned how to start a podcast from Dave Jackson, from his School of Podcasting. And I am good at what I do both because of Dave Jackson's School of Podcasting and 5 years of experience. If you are looking for a podcasting coach, I would highly recommend Dave. Now, if you want a pharmacist to help you plan your podcast, I can help you too. I have a self-paced online podcast planning course for pharmacy professionals under the store tab on thepharmacistvoice.com. If planning a podcast has been on your to-do list, Dave or I can help you get started. At this time, I would like to share some additional background about Dave Jackson. Then I'll roll the interview. Dave Jackson launched the School of Podcasting in 2005. He has been helping people understand technology for more than 20 years as a corporate trainer and podcast consultant. Dave Jackson was inducted into the Podcasting Hall of Fame in 2018. He's the author of the book Profit from Your Podcast: Proven Strategies to Turn Listeners into a Livelihood. The School of Podcasting podcast has more than 930 episodes and over 3.2 million downloads. To learn more, visit schoolofpodcasting.com. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Dave Jackson. Hi, Dave. Welcome back to the Pharmacist's Voice podcast.
Oh, so glad to be here.
It's good to have you with me. It's been a while since you've been on my podcast. I think episode 79 was the last time. That was 3 years ago.
Back in the day, yeah.
Time flies when you're having fun, right?
That's it.
Yeah. Well, I brought you back to give my audience a podcast pep talk. I know some pharmacists want to start a podcast, and you know all of these success stories, and I think they would really benefit by hearing you talk about some of those success stories from some of your clients, some of the people that you've coached over the years.
Yeah, one would be that jumps out is Darren Dake. Darren is a coroner and wanted to talk to other coroners, and there wasn't any kind of like, you go to the bar where all the coroners hang out. No, that wasn't it. So he started Coroner Talk, and it was interesting because he started it, and this is back when CSI was first coming on, before they had CSI Poughkeepsie or whatever. People started like, what? Even if they weren't a coroner, they liked it because it was real CSI stuff. And then that led to him being asked to talk at different events. And then I think he's in, I want to say Maryland, but he ended up being like the head educator of the state in the basement of a church. He started like a school where you could come and get certified because he found out that you have to get certified every now and then. And there were some states that didn't have a place to get certified. And so they could come to his place. And the last time I talked to him, I go, so I understand you're kind of crushing it now. And he goes, yeah, I'm kind of crushing it now. And I'm like, we're doing multiple six figures. I go, yeah, I call that crushing it, because what happened was, this is, sometimes you just get lucky, but he had decided to put some of this online because some people couldn't make the trip. And he finished it right before 2020. So as soon as the pandemic hit, he was online. So people that still needed to get certified could do it online. So that's one. But that was the guy that literally just started off. He just wanted to talk to other coroners. And this led to something. And then will you come talk? And he was like, well, okay. And then will you do this? Sure. Well, then you're this and that. So I've done that. I've been hired multiple times from my favorite, and this sounds like, welcome to Humble Brag Theater. There was a really big conference called the New Media Expo, and it was blogging, it was YouTubing, and it was podcasting and all sorts of stuff. And the guy that was running their podcast space quit. And he called, now I didn't work at Libsyn then, but he called Spreaker, he called Blueberry, and he called Libsyn and said, who do you think I should get to head this up? And they all said, what about Dave Jackson? And so he finally just called me because I'm tired of calling people. They all just say to call you. And so your podcast can really be a resume. I know I was hired to teach at Chancellor University in Cleveland because at the kind of towards the end, like, what do you do for fun? Kind of part of the interview. And I said, I play the guitar, I ride my bike, and I do podcasts. And they're like, you do podcasts? And I said, yeah, I could really see where the college could use like a how to study better and keep every up to date on what's going on with that. So that was one where it kind of came into play. I know I do a show every Saturday called Ask the Podcast Coach. And that's what happened. My co-host's daughter just graduated from college, and she had been doing these different podcasts, and she used that on her resume. And they're like, oh, wow, this is really well done and things like that. So there are a lot of different ways that you can benefit from your podcast. So those are just 3 quickies.
I appreciate that. They're all good stories with happy endings. When you think about pharmacists, I know there's a lot of pharmacists out there that want to be thought leaders, for example, on diabetes, high blood pressure, maybe women's health, a number of topics. Can you think of how podcasting can help a pharmacist become a thought leader?
The beauty of podcasting, where, we call TV and radio broadcasting because it's, a lot of subjects and they're all about an inch deep, right? So we're going to talk about sports and we're going to talk about money and health and, whatever else is going on, local stuff. That's your typical newspaper kind of thing. Nothing really deep, but it's keeping you on what's going on, where podcasting often is one subject. So we went an inch wide, but we're doing a mile deep. And that's where your audience is like, I've been looking for this information. Nobody talks about this stuff. Holy cow, this is exactly what I need. And so that's an easy way to kind of position yourself. We all, we kind of want that big giant audience. And if I said, I'm doing a podcast for, I don't know, football. Okay, well, is that college and pros? And you're like, well, no, just the pros. And you're like, okay, well, you just lost some of your audience. And you're like, okay, what is it, the Northeast or the Southwest or what teams, And you're like, no, we're just going to do Northeast. And then you finally boil it down, and it's like, no, we're just going to talk about the Cleveland Browns. Okay, well, you just lost a lot of people, but the people that are there are like, finally, this is the podcast I was looking for. And I know some sports people, they're like, well, I'm competing against ESPN, but ESPN has sponsors and things like that sometimes limit what they can say. And when it's just Joe Schmo in his basement, they can say whatever they want. And that's one of the beautiful things of podcasting. But you end up with people who only want your content. There is no spam in podcasting, because if I don't like it, I swipe left and hit delete and you're gone, and there's nothing you can do about that. It's definitely something that can position yourself as an expert. Just to give you an example, I used to have a weight loss show, And I would start off and I'd say, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a trainer. I'm just a person like you trying to lose weight in the basement. And I would get these insanely detailed, like, my red blood count is up. And I'm like, wait, time out. Hold on. I don't know if you heard the beginning of the show. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a trainer. Like, oh, well, what sugar level? I'm like, geez. And it dawned on me. I'm like, well, not everybody has a podcast. And apparently by just having one, they assume you must know what you're talking about because you pulled a microphone out and started talking into it. So it's definitely a fun way to kind of position yourself as a thought leader or an expert.
Well said. I really like the part about the Browns. You mentioned the Browns and how there are people out there that are looking for content that's just about the Browns. My husband, God bless him, it's actually his birthday today. He loves the Cleveland Browns. And the Orange and Brown Report, I believe, is a podcast that he follows. Sometimes I'll get into the car with him. He will not have turned off his radio. As soon as he gets in the car, the podcast player starts going. He's got it cranked up to 1.5 to 2 times. He listens to it super fast because he's used to the host. And yes, he's the guy that was looking for that for sure.
That's it. There's a show called Adoptees On. It's for people who were adopted. And I was talking with the host of that. And she said, yeah, there are things that happen when you're adopted. She goes, we've all seen the after-school special where I've been looking for you my entire life, and everybody cries and hugs and mom, then she goes, that's not always the way it ends. And I go, well, what do you mean? She goes, there are people that search for their biological parents for decades and find them and get rejected again. And I was like, that hurts just to say. And she goes, and the only person that knows what that feels like is somebody else who has gone through it. So she has like a Facebook group and some other things. And it's just those things where people can look at you and go, yeah, okay, been there, done that. And so it's a great way to position yourself as an authority, but it's also a great way to then gather a community of people who just want to talk about the Browns.
Yeah, what you're talking about reminds me of the term tribe. You can build a tribe with a podcast, right?
Yeah. And what's beautiful about that is you kind of attract people, at least in my travels, that are kind of like you. So everybody in my community takes their podcast super serious, but we don't take ourselves seriously at all. And we're all kind of smart alecks and we like to joke around and have fun because that's kind of how my podcast is. And so it's a beautiful thing. And when I go to events about podcasting, you kind of go from, oh, I feel like the weird nerd in a spare bedroom to, oh, I'm not the only one that thinks this way and feels this way and loves this subject. I have a member of the School of Podcasting that does a show about model trains. It's one of those hobbies that if you're in it, it's, I guess, apparently super addicting and you get really into it. These people build these elaborate train setups that go through their entire house and people are like, wait, you did what? And then all of a sudden you go to an event and everybody has a train, line going through their bathroom into the living room or whatever. So that's the other thing. It's a great way to just build a community and find your tribe.
I love that comment. Find your tribe. I love trains myself. I have talked about it on my podcast many times. I'm a girl who likes trains, which I know is kind of weird, but I have a Lionel train, which I actually have not talked about. I think it was a Pennsylvania and Ohio engine. Anyways, I love this board game called Ticket to Ride, and there are Facebook groups that I have joined so we can all talk about the different board game maps and routes and, just connect so we can get online and play at the same time. It's fun.
Well, it's
good stuff.
Go on, just to talk about the community. He had stickers made, and he had, I don't know if it's a caboose or whatever, but he had basically this train car made in his colors with his logo, and he sent it on tour. And so he sends it to like a listener. They'll put it on their track and take a picture of it, and then they send it to somebody. So he has an Apple, one of those little round tracker things in the car. So he knows exactly where it is.
The air tags.
Yeah. And then people started saying, well, can you have stickers made? I would love to have, I like this car. I don't want to send it to the next person. I want to keep it here. And so it's just one of those things where you kind of go, wait, it's just my logo. And they're like, yeah. And so you have these rabid fans that want to it's kind of a stamp of approval, or it's like buying the concert t-shirt, right? You're like, yeah, this is who I support. And so that was a fun little community story that he recently shared.
In the world of pharmacy right now, there's a lot of change. the way that we used to practice pharmacy, even 20 years ago when I graduated pharmacy school, I guess it would be 23 years ago. I can't believe that. But anyways, 23 years ago, it was just different, right? And there's a lot of these things on Instagram where people post memes and they're all trying to, I think it's cathartic, right? So they're posting something and everybody's commenting like, oh yeah, that happened to me yesterday. Or, everybody just wants to know that there's somebody out there that feels the same way. So I think it's like empathy. And anyways, I think that's a valid reason for starting a podcast, just to empathize with other people so they know they're not alone. All these things as pharmacists that we experience that are super tough, it's good to talk about because somebody out there needs to hear it.
I have a show I do called Building a Better Dave. And for me, it's $7 therapy. It costs me $7 a month to host it. And I talk about something that is either weird or a lot of it's about me getting older. And I'm like, hey, nobody told me that when you get old, you lose your butt. Like I have to wear a belt now or my pants fall down. Like that's not in the manual anywhere.
Thanks for sharing, Dave.
I think some people just do podcasting just because they want to be heard. They just want to put it out into the universe, and that's perfectly fine. And what's weird about that show, not surprisingly, has the smallest audience because I rarely put out episodes, but it's also the audience. They're like, hey, man, when's the next Better Dave coming out? Like it's been, 2 months. When's another one coming out? So they're very vocal when you do that. And then, sometimes you want to position yourself as an expert, but sometimes you want to, we talked about the community. If you do interviews, well, now you're growing your network. And so that's really, so many people do interviews because they hope, well, if I get this really big guest and that really big guest will share it with their audience, then I'll get some of their audience. And well, really, for me, the biggest benefit of interviews is getting that relationship going with the person you're interviewing and you're growing your network. Because as the old saying goes, it's not who you know, it's who knows you. And you can do that through interviews. So that's another fun byproduct of podcasting. You can do a solo show. And if the goal is to position yourself as the authority, I see a lot of people that get kind of frustrated because the goal is to position themselves as an authority, and then they interview, 90 people in a row. And I'm like, yeah, that's making everybody else look good. Let's have you talk to the audience for a little bit, because that'll grow your influence. But some people just go, I just can't talk to the wall, man. I can't do it. And that's where, if you are doing interviews, I'm old enough to remember Jerry Springer. And at the end of the Jerry Springer show, where everybody's been throwing chairs at each other and stuff like that, Jerry would calmly look into the camera and go, what did we learn today? And I'm like, to me, I always say, always do a Jerry Springer. So you just made somebody look good for 20 minutes. At the end of it, go, the one thing that really stood out there, I remember when I was a kid, and then you go into your own little personal story, and you ever so passive-aggressively remind the audience that it's my show. So if you're going to do interviews, do the Jerry Springer at the end.
That's great advice. I think learned that from you, because I think when I got to podcast episode number 100, episode 100, you and, what was his name? Eric K. Johnson reviewed my podcast on, was it called the Podcast
Review Show? We are creative like that, yeah.
It does. It's as advertised. Yes. It's exactly what happens. Two guys review your podcast, and they give you feedback right there on the episode, and then they air the episode on their website. That's great. Thank you for doing that. I think the point of this is that I learned from you that you can do that wrap up. Now I do kind of like what you did with the Jerry Springer. In fact, I think I have an episode that's coming out on Friday where I talk about this guy who I talked to about his book that he wrote for the Pharmacist Authors series. And then I wrap it up by saying, I read the book, I wrote an Amazon review, and in fact, let me read that review to you, which was cool. And then I'm like, I hope you enjoyed the book. I hope you feel inspired to get the book. And I hope he has inspired you to possibly write your own book. That was my Jerry Springer moment. Right. And then I went into the thank you for listening, yada, yada, yada. Right. Subscribe, connect, blah, blah, blah.
Affiliate link in the show notes.
I need to talk more about my affiliate links in there. I have the School of Podcasting's affiliate link in my show notes, and I have my online courses. And I feel like if I give too many calls to action, I'm overwhelming my audience. So I try to stick some in at the beginning. I'm like, if you've got any interest in contacting me for narrating your audiobook or a medical narration thing or whatever, contact me through the contact form on my website. I try to do it a little in the beginning, little in the end. Yeah, I try.
I have a hard time with that at the end because I coach people, whatever that one thing you want them to do at the end, ask them to do it or really do it in the middle. Because at the end, the minute you say, hey, thanks so much for tuning, they're gone. They're already gone. The minute you hint that we're over, they're gone. So I always try to do my main call to action in the middle now. I do them at the end, but I used to be like, hey, be sure and review or whatever and get the PDF and the checklist. And it's like, okay, they've when you're on call to action number 17, they're long gone and they're confused. So don't do that.
Yeah, I appreciate the comment about the Jerry Springer remark, though. That is a very good thing to include in the end of the podcast, for sure. I have a friend that is a pharmacist, and she doesn't want to start a podcast because she's unsure of the return on investment, time-wise and money-wise. What would you say to a pharmacist who doesn't want to start a podcast because they're just unsure of if they'll benefit enough time-wise and monetarily from the, putting in the effort of starting a podcast?
When it comes to monetization, the number one, hands down, no contest way to make money with your podcast is to sell your own stuff. There are ads, but to get any kind of decent money with those, you have to have around 10,000 downloads an episode, and less than 10% of podcasts get that. And if you're doing a really hyper niche show, that makes it even less. So that's where selling your own stuff really comes into play. But that, you can have ads with smaller numbers. It just, they don't really pay much. So I always tell people, number one, have multiple streams of income. So I have affiliate stuff, I have consulting, I have a membership site, they all kind of trickle in. And the other one is we kind of live in a microwave society. And if you're starting from zero, it's really tough to monetize within, let's say, the first 2 years, because I just started a new podcast. And when it came out, I did a little bit of promotion. I think it had 25 downloads, and that was like 4 episodes ago. And I looked at it today, and already it's up to 65 downloads. So I've tripled my numbers. And I'm like, great, but if I want that to be thousands, I have to, A, have really good content, and B, I have to do a lot of promotion. So nobody wants to hear, well, it's going to take about 3 years to really build an audience. And again, the more niche you are, it might take less time because that person's like, oh, this is finally what I was looking for. And when you say, oh, I have a course in this, they're like, this is amazing. So, feel free to be you're the exception. Please break the 3-year rule. But I always tell people just to give them a realistic kind of expectation, because there are people that will charge you thousands of dollars for 3 easy payments that will sell you a lot of hope. And I always tell people we are kind of in a couple different businesses. We're in education, we're in entertainment, but we're also stealing people's attention. You have to steal people's attention because we're all busy. And so you've got that. And there is a little bit of luck sometimes involved, that you just happen to be in the right place at the right time. And if it was as simple as, I just need to get this in front of 1 million people, then Kim could tell me who season 9 winner of American Idol was, which is, of course, exactly.
I don't
she has
know.
no clue. Yeah, but I'm sure that guy, that person it's a country guy. I looked it up yesterday that I'd never heard of. And he's actually having a decent career, but he's not a household name. And you're like, but you are on a major network in front of millions of people and nobody can remember your name. So there is no checklist. Part of it is presentation and some of it is content. So you can have amazing content, but if you delivered it like a dry piece of toast that was, here's my podcast, well, that's not going to work. And you could have, you could be super energetic and have a $1,000 microphone and you're doing video and YouTube and all, but if the content's no good, well, that's not going to work either. So it's a little bit of a combination of both. And that's what I love about podcasting. And in my last episode, I said, when I grew up, I wasn't on the most richest side. And I think I had, the box of 12 crayons, and somebody would walk in with like 64 crayons and be like, oh, and I go, there's actually now a box of like 151 crayons. And I go, with podcasting, there's no rules. You can kind of do whatever you want to do, and you can be as creative as you want. So that's the part I love about it, is about the time I go, time to do an episode. I'm like, well, let's take this episode that I did. It's an interview. Let's do it narrative style like NPR this time and see what that's like. So I love to play. I'm kind of a creative guy.
I would agree with that. You've had a number of different styles of episodes. What I heard you really saying, without saying it, is that there's some risk. You don't know if there's
Yeah.
going to be any return on investment, but you have to put in the time to build an audience that you can then market to and see what happens. So I think you have to trust yourself, bet on yourself. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, I just read a book from the lead singer of a band called System of a Down, and he said the true art isn't in the finished product, it's in the process. He said, I'm a totally different person by going through this. And I know I've been in situations. I remember I was at a wedding, and the person that had married them apparently wasn't sticking around for the reception. And so my friend looked at me and said, Jackson, you are almost a pastor. Get up there and bless the food, would you? And I was like, okay. And because I make content on a regular basis, right now, at the church I go to, our pastor had to retire because of this thing called old age. And while we're looking for them, I fill in every other week. And then when they asked me, and I'm like, well, yeah, it's just a podcast that I do live in front of people. And so you get better at making content. I think the other thing, because I don't know if you ever heard of this, but sometimes technology is not your friend. And I am pretty easy going now. If something doesn't go right, I'm like, all right, hold on. What do we got left here? Let's do this. I don't really panic as easy as I used to, because I'm just used to things just occasionally not working or not doing what they're supposed to do. So I think there are other benefits besides just the podcast and the finished audio file or video file. I think you learn from doing.
I like that you brought up the process, because where you start is not where you end up 12 episodes later, especially if you only have a monthly podcast. You learn things. Your audience contacts you. They ask for things. You learn what doesn't sound good. You learn what does sound good. You learn how to get comfortable in front of the mic, talking to a wall if it's a solo show. The process is important. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and your audience will let you know if you do something that they don't like. I remember one time there was a radio guy, and he used to say, give me 3 episodes. His name was Jim Rome. He's a sports guy. He'd go, give me 3 episodes. If you don't like me by 3 episodes, you're not going to like me. And I was like, that's pretty cool. So I found this song where a band was counting to 3. And I made this like 30-second thing. And I'm like, hey, it's Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting. And then these guys would come on and go, 1, 2, 3. And I'm like, give me 3 episodes if you don't like that. And then they'd come back in, 1, 2. And I woke up the next day and there were like 4 emails. And they're like, never play that jingle again. That's the most annoying thing I've ever heard. And I was like, all right, note to self, no more 1, 2, 3 jingles. So people will let you know. And even today, I just got off the phone with a friend of mine that listens to my show. And he goes, hey, I heard you talking about this thing. He's like, I tried it. Here's a whole different slant on that. I'm like, I need to have you come on the show. I'm always open to a different opinion. So yeah, they don't typically, if they really hate your show, I've never had somebody just flame out on me. They just don't listen. That's the beautiful thing. If you ever go to a restaurant and your Coke was warmer than your meal, and you go up to check out and they're like, so how was everything? And you go, oh, it's fine. And then you give them your money and you leave and you never come back. So are those people that will just go, that's fine. And then they leave and they never come back.
You bring up a good point. Not everybody's going to like the podcast. Not everybody's going to like the content. You really have to find your people, and your people will unsubscribe or they won't listen to the second episode, right?
Yeah, I have a friend of mine. I used to do a podcast with 2 of my competition. It was called the Podcasters Roundtable. And my one friend who I love dearly, he is so detail oriented and he's kind of dry. And I am not. I am kind of goofy and like to have fun. And so it was funny because that audience would come together, and like his audience would occasionally come over and check out my show. And likewise, my people would go over and check him out. And I got feedback. They're like, man, I tried your friend's show. It's like, guy's dry as toast. I was like, eek. And I was like, oh, he's a good guy. He's great content. But yeah, he's very much just the facts. And then he had people go, man, I tried that Dave guy. He's all over the place, man. He's like the poster child of ADD. Like, holy cow, And that's fine. You can't, if you try to please everybody, you're going to please nobody. And the bottom line is I just try to be myself. And if you like me, you like me. And if you don't, that's fine too.
Well said. We're not all the same. That's for sure.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, and thank goodness. Yeah.
It'd be boring.
And the things that I'm interested in or good at or have a background with, not everybody else has the same makeup, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Dave, once upon a time, you said to me that they come for the content, they stay for the host. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, my first podcast was for musicians. I had taken a blog I had about this is back in the day, so how to get more CD sales and how to get more gigs and things like that. And then I started the School of Podcasting after that. This is back in 2005. And I would have people at the School of Podcasting, and they're like, oh, yeah, I heard you mention that on the musician show. And I go, oh, I didn't know you're a musician. And I'm like, what do you play? And they're like, oh, I don't play anything. I just think you're funny. And I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, I like the stories and the people you have on. And I was like, okay, well, if you ever want to learn guitar, I can teach you how to do that, So, and I've just seen people do that from time to time. And they're just people I listen to. If somebody's on a show that's not something I normally listen to, but I see they're being interviewed, I'll go over and listen to that. And so if you put this in a musical kind of aspect, there are certain guitar players. I'm a guitar player. So there's certain guitar players that I really like. And from time to time, they'll do a side project. Well, I'm still going to go and listen to that. It could be a completely different style of music, but I like that guy and I want to see what he did. So yeah, that definitely is the case that they come for the content, but they stay for the host. And that happens if there's any way, not so much start off the show and you go, hey, let me tell you what Mr. Whiskers did, and you spend 20 minutes talking about your cat. But anytime you can make a point with a personal story, that then they get to kind of know you that way. So when Muhammad Ali died, he was a huge hero of mine. And I said, all right, I still had to talk about podcasting. Mike, here are like 8 things you can learn from Muhammad Ali. And I'm like, he was super talented, really original, always promoting, blah, blah, blah. And I had people then email me like, hey, he was my champ too, buddy. But it was a way to talk about something that meant a lot to me. And so they learned that, like, wow, Dave really liked Muhammad Ali while I was still talking about podcasting. So anytime you can kind of make an illustration through a personal story, A, we all love stories, and B, it's a way for your listeners to get to know you.
Great answer. I love hearing you talk about that because I think sometimes pharmacists need permission to do things, and permission to be themselves is something that you just gave them. Pharmacists out there that want to be podcasters, you have permission to be yourself.
Yeah.
People will come for the content. They will stay for you, the host.
Absolutely.
Dave, I'm going to switch topics here. One of the things that my pharmacist podcaster students have been struggling with is creating MP3 files. What advice do you have for pharmacist podcasters about creating MP3 files?
Well, what's funny about that is, number one, that means you're this close to being public. Because once the MP3 file is, you just upload it to your media host and off you go, and now you're public. So this might be just people getting cold feet. So that's where you make the MP3 file, find somebody not named Mom to listen to it and give you some feedback so you can lean into those things you're doing right and maybe polish those things that need a little bit of polishing. But if you think about it, you've probably been in a Microsoft Word document and then you want to send it to somebody, and we'll pretend it's, 1997 and they don't have Microsoft Word. And you go, hold on, I'll make a PDF of this. Well, you just go into the file menu and go save as PDF. Well, if you're using Audacity, which is a free software that works on every kind of computer, and you've recorded all your stuff, you just go File, Export, MP3, and there are a couple different settings that you have to do. You're like, okay, 128, stereo, and then you click Go, and that's really it. And if you think about it, the first time when the microwave was new, you're like, well, how long do I cook coffee? Like, I've never done coffee in a microwave. And you looked it up and you went, oh, it's, whatever. I don't drink coffee, but 35 seconds, start, and then it did it. So it's one of those things we often really think, oh, I can't do this. I'm not technical. And I always go, well, have you ever attached like a Word document to email? And they go, yeah. And I go, okay, well, then you can upload an MP3 file to your media host. It's the same thing. You're just attaching a file. And have you ever been in the car and your jam comes on and you crank it and they're like, oh, all the time. I love the Pointer Sisters or whatever it is. And so they're rocking out to the Pointer Sisters and the phone rings. And let's pretend you're in a state where you can answer the phone. They turn down the radio so they can hear the person on the phone. And I go, aha, you know how to mix audio. So a lot of times I'm not here to say there's no learning curve, but they're like, oh, I'm not a nerd. And I'm like, well, you don't have to be a giant, pocket protecting, wearing nerd to be a podcaster. You've actually got a lot of the skills already. There's a couple things you got to learn, but it's not half as scary as you think it is.
Thank you for the pep talk. Seriously, I really appreciate it. In your opinion, after years and years of teaching podcasters, not just pharmacists, but podcasters in general, what do you think is the thing that they get hung up on most often?
It's usually they think about the audience, this big reverberating, the audience. And it's like, well, when you first start off, if you get 20 downloads, you'll be doing good because that means your cousins are listening too. There's no way around it. The first time you tied your shoes, the first time you shot a basketball, the first time you went driving. I remember driving going, am I on the curb? I feel like I'm on the curb. We're all like just not very good at it. And so that there's nothing you can do. By the time you get to episode 10, you're going to listen to episode 1 and go, ugh, oh, all right, well, it is what it is. So it's not as hard as you think it is. And that's usually it. And then the other one is imposter syndrome. And that's where, who would listen to me? And so just to give you a couple names you might have heard of, Garth Brooks, Tom Hanks, Meryl Streep, Sir Brian May, the guitar player of Queen. All these people have imposter syndrome. Tom Hanks was on the Today Show. He goes, oh, I'm a total fraud. He goes, I'm waiting for somebody to bust in any time and go, all right, that's enough, Hanks, you're done. And he's like, every time I get done with a movie, I just think that's the last time I'm ever going to work. And so that about 70% of people have this little like, well, who would listen to me? And I always go, because we always go with like, well, nobody's going to listen. To which I always go, yeah, but what if they do? Like, okay, we're going to go negative Nancy, but what if they do listen to it? So, my mom used to say that to make a shadow, you have to have a light. And she goes, because I was kind of like, I turned out okay, Mom. Like, what was your thing? And she said, well, I just figured that if it didn't kill you, I'd let you do it. And so she said, so, there's a light and there's a shadow. She goes, I just prefer to look at the light. And so many people are like, well, nobody's going to listen to this stupid thing. And I'm like, well, but what if they do? What if they do? If you could help that one person who's been dying to hear your content, and you're like, I wish somebody would make a podcast about this. And then they Google it. And they're like, oh my gosh, there's a podcast about this. And then they're going to tell, birds of a feather flock together. So they're going to tell their friends, I found this podcast. Wait till you hear it. So yeah, it could be scary. And then I kind of say this as a joke, but when you go to start a podcast, one of two things are going to happen. You're going to end up with this kick butt podcast, or you're going to have this kick butt story about the time when you thought you would start a podcast. I have a great story about the time I wanted to start golfing, and then I hit a goose and a person all in the first 9 holes. And I was like, I don't think this golfing thing is for me.
Did the goose live, Dave?
The goose lived. It kind of went and flew away. And it was so funny because I was just so bad. And we're on this hole, and there's a guy on the green. And I'm like, I'm going to go ahead and swing. There's no way I'm going to, that would be like the shot of the day. And it was the shot of the day. And we all yelled 4, and it hit the guy in the leg and bounced towards the hole, which is what I think made him mad. And he ran over and kicked my ball off the thing because he had actually helped me make a better shot by bouncing it off his thigh. And I don't think he was too pleased.
I don't think you can do a shot like that on purpose. I don't know. Maybe there's better golfers out there that can. Yeah. I just think of one of my favorite movies, Happy Gilmore. And they should put that in Happy Gilmore 2, which I heard they're making. Did you hear about that?
Nice. No, that's awesome.
I know. Adam Sandler's one of my favorite. Any of his movies, they just make me laugh.
Get in the hole.
Yeah. Bob Barker was in that movie. He's no longer with us. I loved that so much. Oh, my gosh. Great movie. Great times. You brought up some really good points. The audience downloads, people do get hung up on that mentally, right? They worry about their numbers before they even get them, before the podcast even starts. Sometimes they think about imposter syndrome, and then they think about failure. I think that was your third point. Is that right? Like, what if I fail?
You don't. The only way you fail is if you stop. I've done podcasts. I did one because I'd won awards for being a customer service person, and I had delusions of grandeur. I was like, I'm going to start this show. I'm going to creatively call it the Customer Service Show. And I did it. And about 6 episodes in, I was like, you know what? This is my job, and I might be good at it, but it's really not my passion. And so I was like, all right, lesson learned. It's got to be something you really want to talk about. I did one show, with my ex-wife called the Dates from Hell Show, because we were trading stories about these horrible dates we'd been on, and we had about 4. And so we made it about 7 episodes before we ran out of content, and we were trying to get people to, we even had a special call-in number like 1-800-DATES or something. And it turns out, you may have heard of this, the number one fear of humans is what? Speaking in public. And we're asking them to speak in public and please throw yourself under the bus about this horrible time you had on a date. So, yeah, that's when I was like, if you don't have an audience and you're looking for audience participation, that might be a little rough of a road. So that lasted, we just ran out of content. We're like, well, okay, well, that was a fun. And I was like, all right, note to self, don't do an audience participation show without an audience. So they're all learning experiences, and you just tweak it and go. When I first started my show, it was 20 minutes long. And I went to an event and was lucky enough to run into people who would listen to it. And anytime I get in front of a listener, I always ask them, what do you like about the show? And then you have to ask, what do you wish I would change? And then shut up. Just shut up and just embrace the awkward, silence. And sometimes they'll actually say, well, that thing you do with your cat, I wish you would quit doing that. I'm like, perfect, no more cat stuff. And when I asked them, they all said the same thing, your show's too short. And I'm like, really? And they're like, yeah, I'm only like halfway to work by the time your episode's over. And I was like, I'm like, what would be a perfect length? They're like, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes. And so my show is typically 40 to 45. Because to me, I'm like, that's a lot of Dave. But you listen and you learn. And one of my little bumper stickers is, your podcast is a recipe. It's not a statue. So if you want to change it later, you can change it. And some people like the changes and some people won't. But as long as you're having fun. And that's where you mentioned you kind of have to know your why, because my why is not down. I want downloads, obviously, but I measure my success on how many people sign up for the School of Podcasting. And with another show I do, I have crowdfunding. And I mean, I look at my stats because I want to see what's working and what's not. In the end, I kind of don't care. As long as the lights are on and I've got food on the table, I'm happy. And I'm having a great time and I'm making lots of friends, and it's a lot of fun.
I'm glad you're having fun. I'm having fun too. So much fun. I started my second podcast, which has been fun as well. And I'm learning with that as well. You mentioned crowdsourcing a little bit, crowdsourcing answers. You were talking about you and the ex-wife asking people about their bad dates and whatnot.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've been trying to crowdsource information about is like favorite ice cream shops and coffee shops and your favorite place to buy local honey and stuff like that. And I'm not getting people emailing me about it. They're not calling in and leaving voicemails on my website. It's been different. So I feel like when I'm at a public event, I think I just need to take a mic with me and ask people the question live. So there are ways around it. You just have to be creative and resourceful. But I feel you on the whole, crowdsourcing information. And it doesn't go the way that you have in your head. It's happened to me too.
I was hired to do a podcast called Rockin' on the River for the city of Cuyahoga Falls, which had this big event. And so I would go there, and it was amazing because these people had way too much to drink. And you know how often inebriated people are 10 feet tall and bulletproof, and they are, right? They're like, I can do anything, and then you stick a microphone in their face and they just run away. If you don't have your mic, I have done this where I will take my phone and just put it up to my mouth and go, I'm here in the hallway with Jen Smith, blah, 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 and we're talking about this. What do you think? And then just put the phone in front of her face and I call that the Bob Barker, going back to the Bob Barker comment, where you just put the mic in front of people. And by doing that, I ended up with an interview that if I had said, wait here 10 minutes while I go get my microphone, I would have lost it. So, but yeah, sometimes you just have to go out there and, if they're really new to it, then just explain this isn't live radio. If you want to do it more than once, because some people get really nervous around a microphone, but yeah. And then it sounds like you're already doing it. If you're trying to get feedback from your audience, ask a specific question. Because if you ask people, what do you think of the show? They'll go, this is good. Okay, thank you for that awesome feedback. But if you say, what was the main thing you got out of today's episode? Or was it too long? Or was it too short? Or whatever it was, the more specific you can get with your questions. But it's hard. I mean, you could have 100 people listening to your show and you'll get maybe 3 answers if you're lucky. So it's just, that's one of those things where you just got to keep going on. And likewise, if you get feedback from people that's positive, save that because there are going to be those days when you're like, why am I even doing this? And then you go back to your Gmail and you're like, oh, I remember when Cheryl sent this thing, how much she liked it. So do that.
Good advice. The way that I found around that, instead of crowdsourcing the information, I interview one resident of my town at a time, and I just ask them the questions when I have them one-on-one. And then at least I have one person's answers. So we talked about the favorite ice cream shop, and she kind of evaded the question because I think she wants to go to all of them, and she doesn't really have a favorite. She just wants to go to all of them, and that's fine. But it's her answer, and it's valid, so I accepted it.
And then what you can do is go to that shop and say, hey, just so you know, Cheryl said you're the best ice cream in town. And then, and we're going to be talking about you on my podcast. Oh, speaking of that, I have some business cards here. Could I leave these by the checkout counter? Just to kind of, you never know. Because especially with a local show, they might say yes.
That's a really good point. Some of these small businesses around town have the bulletin board as you enter the business, and you can post things from, babysitting jobs to anything else. And I could post things about the podcast.
Go to your local laundromat because you have an audience that cannot leave, right? They're stuck there. And just put a QR code and just have it say, board, point your phone at this. And then have that QR code go to your podcast where they can click play and listen.
I like that.
Doctor's offices, any kind of, Joe's car repair, something where they're like, well, nobody's leaving because you can't leave. Your car's got, one tire left on it. Hang up a flyer and point your phone at this.
Next time I go to a pharmacy conference, I need to get, what are they, like window clings and put them on the bathroom mirrors.
Yes.
Everybody will know I did it, of course, but I could totally do that.
Yeah. Hey, who put this here? Hold on, let me point my phone at this. Oh, that's Kim. There you go.
I think people would probably smile in admiration rather than give me crap about it.
Yeah.
It's a bold move, I say. Bold move.
That's it.
All right, Dave, as we start to wrap this up, I'd like to invite you to promote any of your products or services. The floor is yours, sir.
I run the School of Podcasting. That's kind of my flagship service where I teach you how to plan, launch, grow. And if you want to monetize your show, and if you do want to monetize your show, I have a book called Profit from Your Podcast. You can find that at profitfromyourpodcast.com. And some people go, Dave, you have so much stuff. If you just want to remember one website, go to powerofpodcasting.com, and that has my book and the School of Podcasting and the 37 podcasts that I do when I'm not sleeping. Oh, who don't kid? I don't sleep. But thank you so much for having me.
Oh, yeah, it's my pleasure. And I just bought your audiobook version of Profit from Your Podcast. I bought the printed version, only got through parts of it. Now I'm really going to get through all of it because now I've got the audiobook. I love that you narrate it yourself. Congratulations. I'm
recording a chapter tonight. Yeah, I actually started selling it before it was done. And then you'll hear me say it when I get close to being done and I'm going to start putting it on, Audible and things like that. I'm going to basically have everybody, like you'll get plugged at the end of my book because you bought it. Nice. Looking forward to that. I'm going to be famous. Very good. Well, thank you for everything that you have done for me. You've been my podcasting coach since 2019. It's been 5 years. Can you believe that? No, I can't. But it's, you blink and 5 years goes by. Holy cow. Yep. It's been a fun ride. You've done good for me. I really appreciate you. Always happy to hang out with Kim Newlove. It's always a good time. Always fun. Awesome. We'll have to do this again sometime. Dave, thanks for coming back to the Pharmacist's Voice podcast. Take care. Yep. Take care. Thanks again to Dave Jackson for being my guest today on episode 286 of the Pharmacist's Voice podcast. This is Dave's second time on my show. The other time was episode 79. You can find a link to that episode in the show notes on thepharmacistvoice.com. Since Dave mentioned the Jerry Springer wrap-up during the interview, I gotta do that now. As a review, during our interview, Dave shared some success stories, benefits of podcasting, podcasting tips and tricks, like the call to action early in the episode instead of at the end. He also gave advice about MP3 production, which I told him a lot of my pharmacist students for podcasting struggle with. He talked about mindset advice, not getting hung up on download numbers, being aware of imposter syndrome, and not being afraid to fail.
He also gave some monetization advice, advertising advice, and more. Some of these tips I'm going to use. They were great. This was a very informative interview. On a personal note, I would like to add that I know how hard it can be to get started. Back in 2019, when Dr. Aaron L. Albert told me that I should look into starting a podcast, I was not sure if it was right for me, and I didn't know what to talk about. If you're in the same boat, let me remind you that we're pharmacists. We love to research the hell out of everything. So go with that natural instinct and research podcasting. That's what I did. My research led me to Dave Jackson, but I also thought about the who, what, when, where, how, and why of having a podcast. It takes some thought. If you are interested in starting a podcast, ask yourself some high-quality questions like, why do I want to start a podcast? What's my goal? Who do I want to talk to? Who's my audience? What do I want to talk about? And what does my audience want to hear from me? What do I want my audience to do with the information once they finish the episode? And the big question, what's in it for me? Maybe you want to be a thought leader. Maybe you just want to be heard. Like a cathartic release. I don't know. Maybe it's something else, but ask yourself these high-quality questions, and you will find answers. I know how helpful examples can be, so let's use an example just real quick, and then I'll wrap this up. If you are an expert at owning a community pharmacy in Toledo, Ohio, I live near Toledo, so that's the city I'm using, and maybe you want to answer all of those basic 101 questions that your patients always ask you, like best practices for refilling medications, for example. Maybe your audience is your clientele, your patients, right? What do they need to hear from you regarding refills? Maybe you want to talk about calling and talking to the staff, or using the phone system, or doing online refills. I know this is super basic, but it's just an example. You can educate your clientele on a process. What do you want your audience to do with that information once they finish listening to you educate them about refills? You want them to call the refill in within 5 to 7 days before they need the medicine, right? Just in case there are no refills remaining, or you need to order the drug, or there's a holiday weekend coming up, or there's a prior authorization situation in January, you want them to take action in this case. And what's in it for you? Fewer crises. Their lack of planning always becomes your emergency, right? It's always the pharmacist's fault that they ran out of medicine and have no refills on a holiday weekend, right? No, it's not. But that's the way they make you feel. If you can put this content into a podcast episode and put a QR code that goes straight to the episode about refills in your pharmacy, they could be listening to this episode while they're waiting in line. Or your phone system can advertise this podcast episode while patients are on hold. You can repurpose the content from your podcast on social media too. There are so many examples. I love podcasting because it's just so versatile. I recommend that you start dreaming up how podcasting could be right for you and reach out to Dave or me when it's time to start your podcast planning. Whether you want to be a thought leader on a specific disease state or a leader in your business or something else, we can help. That was my Jerry Springer moment, as Dave called it, and that's all I've got for you today. Thank you for listening to episode 286 of the Pharmacist's Voice podcast. The show notes are on thepharmacistvoice.com. Click on the podcast tab and look for episode 286. In the show notes, you will find links to the School of Podcasting, Dave Jackson on social media, Dave's book, Profit from Your Podcast, my affiliate link for the School of Podcasting, a link to my self-paced podcast planning course, a link to my other podcast, the Perrysburg Podcast, which we mentioned during the interview, my social media links, and more. LinkedIn is my favorite. Please feel free to reach out and connect. If you know someone who's interested in starting a podcast, do me a favor and share this episode with them. And if you like this podcast, please subscribe to or follow the Pharmacist's Voice podcast on your favorite podcast player and YouTube. Then you'll get each new episode right when it comes out. Thanks for listening today. I will talk to you next week. This is a bonus. I don't usually do this, but this interview was recorded on my husband's birthday, June 10th, 2024, and it is being published on my birthday. Talking to my podcasting coach for this interview was a lot of fun, and I'm so glad I did it, but it's even cooler that it comes out on my birthday. It's like my birthday gift. Thanks, Dave, for being part of my birthday this year. Take care, everybody. Have a great weekend.